"You're under arrest for fraud and grand theft," Captain Rodriguez announced as James's face went white with shock, the elegant crew's dining room falling silent around them. "Please, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing just how far our stories reach." Now, let me take you back to where this story began, just 10 days earlier. The Mediterranean sun cast a golden glow across the pristine deck of the Serenity of the Seas as passengers began boarding in Barcelona. Among them was Victoria Ashford, a woman who commanded attention without even trying. At 58, she moved with the grace of someone who had learned to carry herself with confidence through both triumph and tragedy. Her auburn hair caught the light as she stepped aboard, designer luggage trailing behind her, while her personal assistant, Amanda Winslow, followed closely with an armload of documents and a tablet. "Your suite is ready, Mrs. Ashford," Amanda said, her voice carrying just a hint of her Boston accent. "I've already confirmed your dinner reservations and the shore excursions you requested." Victoria smiled warmly at the younger woman who had become far more than an employee over the past 3 years. "Amanda, how many times do I need to tell you? It's Victoria when we're not in a business meeting, and this is supposed to be a vacation for both of us." "Old habits," Amanda replied with a grin, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. At 32, she had the sharp instincts of someone who had worked her way up from nothing and an unwavering loyalty to the woman who had given her a chance when others wouldn't close. Her previous job at a corporate security firm had taught her to spot financial red flags, but she hoped those skills wouldn't be needed on vacation. As they made their way through the ship's opulent atrium, neither woman noticed the man watching them from across the marble-floored lobby. James Whitmore, though that wasn't his real name, had been tracking Victoria's movements for weeks through social media posts and public records. He knew she would be on this cruise, knew which suite she had booked, and knew exactly how much her late husband's pharmaceutical empire had left her. $200 million, to be precise. James was 45, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of practiced charm that had made him very wealthy, at other people's expense. His tailored Italian suit cost more than most people's cars, purchased with money stolen from his previous mark, a lonely widow named Helen Morrison whom he had convinced to invest $5 million in a fabricated biotech startup. Helen's money had funded his luxurious lifestyle for the past year, and now it was time to find his next target. The welcome reception that evening was held on the ship's sprawling Lido deck, with champagne flowing and a string quartet providing elegant background music. James had booked this specific cruise after carefully researching Victoria's travel plans, and he had requested a table change at check-in to ensure they would be seated together during the captain's introduction. Victoria arrived wearing a stunning navy dress that complemented her figure perfectly, with Amanda beside her in professional but stylish attire. They found their assigned table just as James approached from the opposite direction, timing his arrival to appear coincidental. "Excuse me," James said with a perfectly calibrated smile. "I believe this is table 7? "It is indeed," Victoria replied, noting his confident posture and expensive watch. "I'm Victoria Ashford, and this is my assistant Amanda." "James Whitmore," he said, extending his hand with just the right amount of warmth. "What a pleasure." "I have to say, I was dreading another cruise filled with stuffy couples and retirees talking about their grandchildren." Victoria laughed, a genuine sound that made James's practiced smile become slightly more real. "Well, I can promise you won't hear any grandchildren stories from me. I never had children." "Nor did my late wife and I," James replied smoothly, noting the slight shadow that crossed Victoria's face at the mention of loss. "Perfect. Common ground established. We always said we were too busy building our lives to build a family. Sometimes I wonder if that was the right choice." "I'm sorry for your loss," Victoria said softly. "How long has it been?" 3 years this October, James lied easily. "Cancer. She fought bravely, but..." He let his voice trail off with practiced vulnerability. "I'm sure you understand. Amanda mentioned you're Mrs. Ashford, but you're traveling alone." "It's been 4 years for me," Victoria admitted. "Heart attack. Charles always said he'd work himself to death, and he nearly proved himself right." She paused, then straightened her shoulders. "But life goes on, doesn't it?" We honor them by living fully. Beautifully said, James replied, raising his champagne glass. To living fully. As they clinked glasses, Amanda watched the exchange with growing interest. Something about James Whitmore bothered her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. His smile was too perfect, his timing too convenient. In her 3 years working for Victoria, she had developed a protective instinct toward her employer, who had a tendency to see the best in people, sometimes to her detriment. So what business keeps you busy enough to skip the grandchildren phase? Victoria asked with a playful smile. Technology mostly, James replied. I've been fortunate enough to exit from a couple of startups in the past decade. The last one was acquired by a major pharmaceutical company, actually. Ironic, considering your late husband's background. Victoria's eyebrows rose with interest. Really? Charles always said the future of medicine was in technology integration. What kind of work did you do? Diagnostic algorithms primarily. We developed software that could predict cardiac events weeks before traditional methods. James had researched this topic extensively, knowing Victoria's husband had died of a heart attack. It's bitter irony that I spent years working on heart disease prevention, only to lose my wife to cancer. The conversation continued for another hour, with James skillfully confirming information he already knew about Victoria's investment preferences and business background, while making it seem like natural conversation. He learned that she was actively involved in managing her wealth, that she had grown cautious about traditional investment advisors, and that she had particular interest in medical technology companies. Meanwhile, Amanda found herself studying James more closely. His suit was expensive, yes, but there was something about his jewelry that seemed off. The watch was impressive but flashy in a way that truly wealthy men typically avoided. His cufflinks were gold but obviously new, lacking the patina of inherited pieces or the understated elegance of custom work. Most tellingly, when he mentioned his late wife, he didn't exhibit the subtle habits of a long-married man, no unconscious glance at his ring finger, no automatic reference to we when discussing preferences. After the reception, as Victoria and Amanda walked back to their suite, Amanda couldn't shake her uneasiness. What did you think of James? Victoria asked as they entered the elegant sitting room of their adjoining suites. He's certainly charming, Amanda replied carefully. He seemed very interested in your business background. Well, we have a lot in common. It's refreshing to meet someone who understands the challenges of building a company. Victoria kicked off her heels and settled into a plush armchair. And he's clearly done well for himself. Did you see that watch? Patek Philippe, unless I'm mistaken. Amanda made a mental note to research Patek Philippe watches later. Just be careful, Victoria. You know how I worry. Amanda, I'm 58 years old, not 18. I think I can handle a conversation with a fellow passenger without falling for some smooth-talking con man. Victoria's tone was gentle but firm. Besides, even if I were interested in romance, which I'm not saying I am, what's the worst that could happen on a cruise ship? The next morning brought their first port of call, Monaco. James had arranged to accidentally encounter Victoria at the ship's excursion desk, where he smoothly suggested they share a private tour rather than join the crowded group activities. I've been to Monaco a dozen times, he said with casual confidence, and I know a wonderful little gallery that most tourists never find. The owner is a friend of mine. She has an incredible collection of contemporary pieces that aren't on public display. Victoria found herself charmed by his apparent insider knowledge and obvious sophistication. They spent the day exploring Monte Carlo, with James displaying an impressive familiarity with art, fine dining, and luxury travel. He paid for everything with cash, large bills peeled from a substantial roll, reinforcing the image of someone who didn't need to worry about money. What Victoria didn't realize was that James had spent the previous evening researching everything about Monaco that could be found online. And the friend at the gallery was actually a tourist-friendly shop owner who would warmly greet anyone who walked in with enough cash to make a purchase. During lunch at a seaside restaurant, James began confirming more details about Victoria's financial situation. You know, Victoria, I have to admit I'm impressed by how well you've managed your transition from being part of a business partnership to managing your own investments, he said, cutting into his expensive seafood. I did some research after we met. I hope you don't mind. Your husband's pharmaceutical work was impressive. I imagine you learned quite a bit about medical technology investments during those years? Charles always insisted I be involved in the business decisions, Victoria replied. He said too many women his age became helpless when their husbands died because they'd never learned to manage money. I'm grateful for that now, even though it sometimes feel overwhelmed by the responsibility. What kind of investment strategy are you pursuing now? James asked with apparent casual interest. Your public filings suggest you've moved away from traditional portfolio management. Honestly, I'm looking for something more dynamic, Victoria admitted. My current advisors are very conservative, but I feel like I'm not keeping up with inflation. I've been thinking about exploring some alternative investments, maybe technology companies or private equity opportunities. James felt a familiar thrill of excitement. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. You know, it's interesting you mention that. I've been looking at a few opportunities myself. There's a particular biotech startup that's doing fascinating work with early-stage cancer detection. The potential returns could be extraordinary, but they're only accepting investors who can commit significant capital initially. How significant? Victoria asked with genuine interest. They're looking for minimum commitments in the 2 to 3 million range. James replied carefully. It's substantial, but so are the potential returns. The company has preliminary FDA approval for trials, and if their technology works as projected, early investors could see returns of 10 to 20 times their initial investment within 3 years. James leaned forward conspiratorially. I wasn't planning to mention it, but given your background with pharmaceutical companies, you might have a better understanding of the science than most potential investors. Victoria felt a flutter of interest. Charles had always regretted missing out on several biotechnology investments that had made other people fortunes. It does sound intriguing. Do you have any documentation I could review? I have some preliminary information back on the ship, James replied smoothly. But I should warn you, they're planning to close this round of funding soon. These opportunities don't last long in today's market. That evening, back on the ship, Amanda noticed the change in Victoria's demeanor immediately. There was an energy about her employer that she hadn't seen since before Charles's death, an excitement that made Amanda both happy and nervous. You seem to have enjoyed Monaco, Amanda observed as Victoria described her day. I did, actually. James is wonderful company. He's knowledgeable about art, well-traveled, and he has some interesting investment insights. Victoria paused in front of her sweets mirror, removing her earrings. Amanda, what do you know about biotech investments? Enough to know they're extremely risky, Amanda replied immediately. Why do you ask? James mentioned an opportunity. Early-stage cancer detection technology. It sounds fascinating and potentially very profitable. Amanda felt alarm bells going off in her head. Victoria, please tell me you're not considering investing in something recommended by a man you met yesterday. Of course not, Victoria said, though her tone suggested she was definitely considering it. But I'd like to learn more about it. James has some documentation he's going to share with me tomorrow. Just promise me you'll run anything by your financial advisor before making any decisions, Amanda said. Amanda, I've been making financial decisions for 4 years now. I think I can evaluate an investment opportunity without supervision. Victoria's voice carried a slight edge of irritation. James isn't some stranger trying to sell me a timeshare. He's a successful businessman who's made his own fortune in technology. Amanda decided to drop the subject for the moment, but she made a mental note to keep a very close eye on James Whitmore and whatever investment opportunity he was planning to present. Meanwhile, Tony Martinez, the ship's chief photographer, was reviewing photos from the day's shore excursions when something caught his eye. He studied a candid shot he'd taken of couples on the Monaco waterfront, focusing on a silver-haired man with an elegant woman. Something about the man's posture, the way he touched the woman's hand, triggered a memory that made Tony's stomach drop. 8 months ago, on the Ocean Princess, Tony had photographed what he thought was the most romantic couple he'd ever seen. The way the silver-haired man looked at the beautiful woman from Texas, touched her hand, whispered in her ear, it had made Tony ache with loneliness and hope. He'd even taken candid shots of them because their connection seemed so genuine, so beautiful. Tony remembered thinking, that's what I want someday, someone who looks at me like that. But now, staring at his Monaco photos, Tony realized he was seeing the exact same intimate gestures, the same adoring expressions, directed at a completely different woman. No one fell in love twice like that in less than a year. The next day brought another shore excursion, this time to Barcelona's famous museums. Once again, James arranged to accompany Victoria, and once again he demonstrated impressive knowledge and sophistication. He also began sharing more personal stories about his late wife, carefully crafted tales designed to deepen the emotional connection while establishing his credentials as a successful investor. Elizabeth was the cautious one in our relationship, he said as they stood before a Picasso in the museum. She always worried that I took too many risks with our investments. But risk and reward go hand in hand, don't they? If we'd only invested in safe, boring stocks, we never would have had the freedom to travel the world and collect art like this. Charles was the same way. Victoria replied, conservative by nature, but willing to take calculated risks when the opportunity was right. He always said the biggest risk was not taking any risks at all. Smart man, I wish I could have met him. James placed a gentle hand on Victoria's arm. I think he would have approved of you taking charge of your financial future, rather than just letting some fund manager make all the decisions. That evening, James invited Victoria to dinner at the ship's most exclusive restaurant, a small venue that required reservations months in advance. He had managed to secure a table through a substantial tip to the maitre d', but Victoria was impressed by his apparent influence and planning. Over a meal that cost more than many people's weekly salary, James presented his investment opportunity with professional-looking documents printed on expensive paper. The company was called Helix Diagnostics, and according to the materials, they had developed revolutionary technology that could detect certain cancers years before traditional methods. The science is incredibly promising, James explained, sliding a bound presentation across the table. They've already completed successful trials on laboratory animals, and they're about to begin human trials. The FDA has granted them fast-track approval for testing. Victoria studied the documents with growing interest. The technology seemed legitimate, the financial projections were impressive but not unrealistic, and the management team's credentials appeared solid. What she didn't know was that James had paid a considerable sum to have these materials professionally created by a graphic designer who specialized in corporate presentations. The minimum investment is $2 million. James continued. But investors who commit at that level receive preferential terms and guaranteed participation in future funding rounds. I'm planning to invest $5 million myself. $5 million? Victoria looked up from the documents. That's a substantial commitment. It is, but I've done my due diligence. I've met with the research team, visited their laboratories, and reviewed their preliminary data. This isn't a gamble, Victoria. It's a calculated investment in technology that could save millions of lives while generating exceptional returns for early backers. Victoria felt the familiar excitement that had driven her and Charles to build their pharmaceutical empire. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Charles would have pursued aggressively. How quickly do they need a decision? They're closing this round of funding next week, James replied with apparent regret. I wish I could give you more time to consider it, but the opportunity is simply too good to remain available for long. I'd need to arrange for the liquid capital, Victoria mused. That would take a few days to coordinate with my financial team. Actually, they have a streamlined process for qualified investors, James said helpfully. Their investment management firm handles the technical details. They're based offshore for tax optimization purposes, which is standard for this type of international opportunity. I could give you the account information. Meanwhile, Amanda had spent the afternoon catching up on correspondence for Victoria's various business interests back in her suite. She activated the voice-to-text software on her laptop and began dictating responses to emails about board meetings and investment opportunities. Dear Mr. Patterson, thank you for your proposal regarding the biotech portfolio review. Victoria emerged from her bedroom, fastening a pearl earring. Amanda, I completely forgot. Could you run down to the concierge and pick up those theater tickets for tomorrow night's show? I promised James we'd go together. Of course, Amanda replied, saving her work but leaving the dictation software running out of habit. I'll be back in 20 minutes. As Amanda gathered her purse and headed for the door, James appeared in the hallway, looking impeccable in a fresh dinner jacket. Perfect timing, Victoria called from the bedroom. James, make yourself comfortable in the sitting room. I just need 5 more minutes to finish getting ready. Take your time, beautiful, James replied with his practiced charm, settling into the plush armchair nearest Amanda's forgotten laptop. The moment he heard Victoria's shower start, James pulled out his phone. He had no idea that the laptop 3 feet away was faithfully recording every word, the small red indicator light hidden behind a decorative lamp. Yeah, it's going perfectly, James said quietly into his phone. She's completely hooked. Lonely widow, tons of money, and desperate for male attention. I'm thinking I can get her to wire at least 3 million, maybe more. No, she's not suspicious at all. These rich widows are all the same. Throw some expensive dinners and fake romance at them and they'll hand over their life savings. He paused, listening to his partner on the other end. What do you mean Helen's hired investigators? How close are they? Shit. Okay, I need to accelerate the timeline then. I'll get Victoria to provide her banking information tonight and we'll move the money tomorrow morning. This has to be the last one for a while. We need to disappear after this score. Amanda returned to her laptop an hour later, intending to finish her correspondence. As she sat down, she noticed the dictation software was still running. About to close it, she glanced at the screen and froze. There, in neat typed paragraphs, was James's entire phone conversation, captured word for word by the software that had been patiently waiting for her to return. Her hands shaking, Amanda immediately saved the file and began printing copies. She needed to find Victoria immediately, but first she needed backup. She remembered Tony Martinez from the photography sessions. He seemed observant and trustworthy. Maybe he could help her figure out what to do with this evidence. She found Tony in the ship's photo gallery, organizing prints from the day's excursions. Tony, I need to ask you something urgent and I need you to be completely honest with me, Amanda said, showing him a photo she had discreetly taken of James and Victoria with her phone. Have you ever seen this man before? Tony's face went pale as he studied the image. Yeah, I remember him now. About 8 months ago, on the Ocean Princess. I actually envied him. Tony's voice grew quiet. He was with this beautiful woman from Texas, and they seemed so in love. I mean, really in love. The way he looked at her, touched her hand, whispered in her ear. I remember thinking, that's what I want someday. I even took some candid shots of them because their connection was so genuine, so beautiful. He paused, his expression darkening. Except now he's here 8 months later, looking at another lady exactly the same way. No one falls in love twice like that in less than a year. Amanda felt her heart rate increase. Tony, I just recorded him confessing to running a con game on Victoria. He's planning to steal millions from her tomorrow morning. Tony's expression turned grim. We need to stop him, and we need to involve Captain Rodriguez. He has protocols for handling suspected criminal activity on board. Can you help me gather more evidence? I need something to convince Victoria that everything she thinks she knows about James is a lie. Absolutely. I've got photos from that previous cruise in my archives, and I know the protocol for contacting ship security about suspected criminal activity. While Amanda was building her case with Tony's help, James was escalating his timeline. He had returned to Victoria's suite with an expression of urgent concern. I'm sorry, Victoria, but there's been a development, he said, as Victoria emerged from her bedroom in an elegant dress. I just received a call from my contact at Helix Diagnostics. They've had several major investors express interest in the remaining positions, and they're planning to close the funding round early tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Victoria felt a flutter of panic. But I haven't even initiated the asset coordination yet. I know it's rushing things, but I'd hate for you to miss this opportunity, James said with apparent sincerity. Look, we can streamline the process. If you provide me with your banking credentials tonight, I can coordinate the transfer through my investment account. It's a more secure process anyway. Your money never sits in an intermediate account. Victoria hesitated. Something about the arrangement felt off, but she couldn't deny the logic of James's proposal. I don't know, James. Providing banking information seems... I understand your hesitation, but time-sensitive opportunities require flexible solutions, James replied smoothly. I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't trust you completely, and if I wasn't absolutely confident about this investment, but if you're not comfortable with it, I understand. Maybe next time there will be an opportunity with more conventional timing. The suggestion that she might miss out entirely made Victoria waver. Let me think about it overnight, she said finally. Of course, James replied, though his smile was slightly strained. Just remember, by tomorrow afternoon this opportunity will be gone forever. That evening, as Victoria prepared for bed, Amanda made one last desperate attempt to intervene. She had spent the afternoon gathering evidence with Tony's help, and what they had discovered was damning. Victoria, please, just look at this before you make any decisions about tomorrow, Amanda pleaded, spreading photographs, printed documents, and transcripts across the coffee table in Victoria's suite. Amanda, what is all this? Evidence that James Whitmore isn't who he claims to be, Amanda said firmly. Tony took these photos 8 months ago on another cruise. Look at this man in these candid shots. Victoria glanced at the photos and felt her stomach drop. It was clearly James, but he was with a completely different woman, his arm around her waist in the same possessive romantic gesture he had used with Victoria. That could be anyone, Victoria said weakly, but her confidence was already cracking. Tony remembers him perfectly. He thought they were the most romantic couple he'd ever seen, and it made him lonely because he wanted what they seemed to have. But 8 months later, here's the same man with you, using identical gestures, identical expressions. Amanda pulled out her laptop. And this is a transcript of a phone conversation he had in your sitting room this afternoon, when he thought he was alone. Victoria read the transcript with growing horror. The cold, calculating language, the casual dismissal of her as a lonely widow, the reference to "these rich widows are all the same." It was devastating. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered, sinking into her chair. I was about to give him my banking information." "There's more," Tony said, appearing in the doorway with Amanda's permission. "I contacted the crew bulletin system. We keep records of suspicious passenger activities." James was flagged after the previous cruise when the woman from Texas reported attempted fraud. Security escorted him off the ship, but there wasn't enough evidence for arrest. Victoria looked up at her assistant and the cruise photographer who had risked their positions to protect her. The humiliation of nearly falling for such an elaborate con was overwhelming, but beneath the embarrassment, she felt something else building. Anger. He mentioned investigators closing in on his previous victim, Victoria said, studying the transcript again. Someone named Helen who hired people to track him down. "That's probably Helen Morrison," Amanda said. "I did some research this afternoon. She lost $5 million to a biotech investment scam last year. The case is still open." Victoria stood up, her posture straightening as the confident businesswoman who had helped build a pharmaceutical empire emerged from behind the vulnerable widow James thought he was manipulating. "We're going to stop him, and we're going to make sure he faces justice for what he's done." Over the next 2 hours, the three of them developed a plan with Tony, coordinating through Captain Rodriguez. Victoria would pretend to go along with James's banking information request, but instead of actually providing access to her accounts, she would gather evidence of his criminal intent while Amanda recorded their conversations and Tony worked with ship security to involve the proper authorities. "The ship docks in Palma tomorrow afternoon," Tony explained. "Captain Rodriguez has contacted local authorities and they're working with international law enforcement. If we can get solid evidence of attempted fraud, they'll be waiting when we arrive." "What kind of evidence do we need?" Victoria asked. A recording of him attempting to steal your banking information or admitting that the investment is fake would be enough for fraud charges, Amanda replied. Can you get him to be specific about his intentions? Victoria straightened her shoulders, the confident businesswoman who had outmaneuvered competitors and built an empire emerging fully. Leave that to me. The next morning, Victoria called James with apparent resignation about the banking information. I've been thinking about what you said last night, she said. You're right. Sometimes you have to take risks to achieve exceptional returns. I'm ready to provide the account access you need. That's wonderful news, James replied, and Victoria could hear the predatory satisfaction in his voice. Should we meet for breakfast to handle the details? Let's make it lunch, Victoria suggested. I want to celebrate this partnership properly. They agreed to meet at the ship's elegant main dining room, and Victoria spent the morning preparing for the most important performance of her life. Amanda helped her practice the conversation, anticipating James's responses and planning how to steer him toward explicit admissions. At lunch, Victoria played the role of the resigned, slightly nervous investor perfectly. I have to admit, James, I'm still a little anxious about providing my banking credentials. I've never done anything like this before. I completely understand, James replied smoothly, leaning forward with apparent concern. But remember, we're not just moving your money, we're moving it outside the reach of government oversight and taxation. Once it's in the Cayman Islands account, it's completely secure and private. What exactly happens to my banking access once I give you the information? Victoria asked with carefully crafted uncertainty. Well, I'll need your account numbers, routing information, and online access codes, James explained, unaware that Amanda's phone was recording every word from her purse under the table. That allows me to transfer the funds quickly without delays from bank verification procedures. The beauty of this system is that once the money is offshore, there's no paper trail back to you. That sounds almost too good to be true, Victoria said with a nervous laugh. It's not exactly conventional, James said with a conspiratorial wink, but it's not illegal either, if you understand the distinction. We're simply taking advantage of international banking laws that favor investors who know how to navigate the system. Victoria felt a surge of triumph as James continued to incriminate himself, describing money laundering techniques while thinking he was impressing her with his sophistication. James, can I ask you something personal? Victoria said, leaning forward with apparent intimacy. How did you learn so much about these offshore strategies? You seem to know techniques that even my late husband's financial advisors never mentioned. James's ego couldn't resist the opportunity to brag. Let's just say I've had some very profitable experiences with investors who were looking for alternatives to traditional portfolio management, he said. There was a situation in Dallas last year where I helped a widow optimize her returns on a medical technology investment. And before that, a lady in Phoenix who substantially increased her retirement savings with a pharmaceutical opportunity I introduced her to. Victoria's stomach turned as she realized he was describing previous victims, but she forced herself to maintain her fascinated expression. That's incredible. They must have been so grateful. Initially, yes, James said with obvious satisfaction. Of course, offshore investments can be volatile. Sometimes market conditions change or regulatory issues arise unexpectedly. The smart money understands that you have to accept some losses to achieve exceptional gains. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, preparing Victoria to accept the inevitable loss of her money as simply part of the investment process. But instead of the naive widow he thought he was educating, Victoria was an experienced businesswoman who recognized exactly what he was doing. James, I need to confess something, Victoria said, her tone shifting slightly. I haven't actually arranged to provide my banking information. James's expression flickered for just a moment before he recovered his smooth demeanor. Oh, is there a problem with your financial team? No, there's a problem with you, Victoria said calmly. You see, I know exactly who you are, James Whitmore, or should I call you by whatever your real name actually is? The color drained from James's face as he realized his carefully constructed con was collapsing around him. I don't know what you're talking about, Victoria. I think you might be confused. I'm not confused at all, Victoria replied, her voice growing stronger. I know about the widow from Texas you conned 8 months ago. I know about the fake investment documents you showed me. I know about Helen Morrison and the $5 million you stole from her. And I know that there is no Helix diagnostics, no cancer detection technology, and no opportunity for me to lose millions to your offshore accounts. James stood up abruptly, his charming mask finally slipping completely. You can't prove anything, he said, his voice now cold and threatening. And even if you could, what are you going to do about it? We're in the middle of the ocean. Actually, we're about to dock in Palma, Victoria said with a satisfied smile. And Captain Rodriguez is waiting for us with some very interesting questions about your previous cruise activities and current criminal intentions. As if summoned by her words, Captain Rodriguez appeared at their table flanked by 2 security officers. Mr. Whitmore, or whoever you are, I need you to come with me. We have some matters to discuss regarding your activities aboard my ship, and local authorities are waiting to speak with you about international fraud charges. James looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run on a cruise ship in port. As the security officers moved to escort him away, he turned back to Victoria with venom in his eyes. You think you're so smart, he hissed. But you're just another lonely old woman who was desperate enough to fall for a younger man's attention. If you hadn't gotten lucky with your little investigation, you would have handed over those account codes without a second thought. You're absolutely right, Victoria replied calmly. I was lonely and I was flattered by your attention, but you made one crucial mistake. What's that? You underestimated the people who care about me, Victoria said, nodding toward Amanda and Tony, who had appeared behind the captain. And you'll find that mistake has cost you everything. As the security officers led James away, Captain Rodriguez turned to Victoria with a respectful nod. Mrs. Ashford, the local authorities will want to interview you when we dock, but I want you to know that your evidence will help ensure this man faces justice for his crimes. Our corporate security office has been working with international law enforcement, and it appears he's wanted in connection with several similar crimes across multiple jurisdictions. What will happen to him? Victoria asked. Based on what we've uncovered, he'll be charged with fraud, money laundering, and operating an international con game. The evidence you gathered, combined with what we know about his previous activities, should ensure he won't be targeting any more victims for a very long time. That evening, as the ship prepared to continue its journey to the final port, Victoria stood on her private balcony with Amanda and Tony, watching the lights of Palma disappear in the distance. I can't believe I almost fell for it, Victoria said, shaking her head. Charles always said I was too trusting for my own good. You didn't fall for it, Amanda pointed out. You listened to the people who care about you, and you helped catch a criminal who has hurt multiple people and would have hurt many more. What will happen to the money he stole from Helen Morrison and his other victims? Victoria asked. The authorities are working to trace his assets and recover what they can, Tony replied. It won't be everything, but it's more than those people had yesterday. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then turned to Amanda with a determined expression. I want to do something for his victims. Set up a fund to help people who've been targeted by romance, scams, and investment fraud. We'll start with $5 million. Victoria, that's incredibly generous, Amanda said. But are you sure? I'm completely sure, Victoria replied firmly. James was right about one thing. I am a wealthy widow who was vulnerable to the attention of a charming man. The difference is that I had people looking out for me. Not everyone is that fortunate. What about the jewelry and gifts he gave you? Tony asked. Those pieces were probably worth $100,000 or more. Victoria smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. Those are going into the victims' fund too. Let's see how much good we can do with money he spent trying to deceive women like me. As the cruise continued toward its final destination, Victoria found herself reflecting on the experience with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had been foolish to trust James so quickly, but she had also been smart enough to listen to the people who truly cared about her welfare. More importantly, she had discovered that she was stronger than she had realized. The confident businesswoman who had helped Charles build their empire hadn't disappeared when he died. She had just been hidden beneath grief and loneliness. Now, having faced down a professional con artist and emerged victorious, Victoria felt more like herself than she had in years. On their last night aboard the ship, Victoria, Amanda, and Tony shared a private dinner to celebrate their unlikely partnership and friendship. "I have a proposition for both of you," Victoria said as they finished their dessert. "Amanda, I know you've been thinking about expanding your role beyond personal assistance. What would you say to heading up my new victim advocacy foundation? Your investigative instincts and protective nature would be perfect for helping other people avoid what almost happened to me." Amanda's eyes lit up with excitement. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious." And Tony, Victoria turned to the photographer. "How would you feel about a career change?" "I think someone with your observational skills and ability to read people would make an excellent private investigator. The foundation could use someone like you to help track down criminals like James." Tony looked stunned. "Mrs. Ashford, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Victoria replied with a laugh. "I've learned that life is too short to surround yourself with anything but the best people, and you two have proven yourselves to be exactly that." As the ship sailed toward Homeport the following morning, Victoria stood once again on her balcony, but this time she wasn't alone. Amanda was beside her, already discussing plans for the Victim Advocacy Foundation, while Tony was on his phone with a private investigation firm that Victoria had recommended. The lonely widow who had boarded the ship 10 days earlier was gone, replaced by a confident woman who had rediscovered her strength and surrounded herself with people worthy of her trust. She had faced a master manipulator and emerged victorious, not through luck or accident, but through intelligence, courage, and the support of true friends. And somewhere in a Spanish jail cell, James Whitmore was learning that the lonely widow he had thought would be his biggest score had instead become his final downfall. The authorities had discovered that his real name was Kevin Blake, and he had warrants in 6 countries for similar romance and investment scams totaling over $20 million in stolen funds. Victoria smiled as the ship approached the harbor, thinking about the victims' fund she would establish, the foundation she would build with Amanda, and the life she would create moving forward. Charles would have been proud of her for taking charge of her future, but more than that, he would have been proud of her for using her strength to protect others. The expensive jewelry James had given her, purchased with Helen Morrison's stolen money, would fund the first year of victim support services. The satisfaction of turning his tools of deception into instruments of justice felt better than any revenge she could have imagined. The cruise was ending, but Victoria's new chapter was just beginning. And this time, she knew exactly who she could trust to help her write it. Thank you for listening until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please consider leaving us a like. This helps us reach more people.